The first time my father called me a fraud in open court, I didn't react. Not because it didn't sting. It did. It landed clean, right in the middle of my chest, like something practiced. But I'd had 28 years of practice too, at not reacting. "Your Honor," he said, voice smooth, carrying just enough to reach the back row, "my son has built his entire case on half-truths and dramatics. It's impressive, honestly. But not lawful." There was a ripple in the room. Not loud. Just enough. I kept my hands folded on the table, thumbs resting lightly against each other. My attorney glanced at me, waiting for some signal. I gave him none. Across the aisle, my father adjusted his cufflinks like he'd just delivered a closing argument instead of a personal jab. Yeah. That didn't sit right. But I'd learned a long time ago, if you let him see it land, he wins twice. So I just nodded once, like, sure, whatever. And let it play out. People like to think moments like that start in court. They don't. They start years earlier, in quieter rooms. For me, it started in a kitchen that always smelled faintly like coffee and something overcooked. My father liked things just a little burnt, said it gave them character. I was 16 the first time he corrected me in front of someone. Not harshly. Not loud. Just precise. I'd been explaining a simple concept to one of his colleagues, something about a case he was working on, something I thought I understood. He let me finish. Smiled. Then said, "What he means is..." And re-explained it, cleaner, sharper, with just enough difference to make mine sound off. The colleague laughed lightly. "Well, you're raising him right." My father didn't look at me when he said, "I'm trying." That became a pattern. He never shut me down outright. Never raised his voice. Just refined me. Publicly. Subtly. Over and over again. At dinner, if I told a story, he'd tighten the details. At family gatherings, he'd reframe my opinions. At school events, he'd clarify what I meant. Always with a smile. Always with that calm tone. And every time, I'd swallow it. Smile back. Adjust. It builds, you know? That quiet kind of humiliation. The kind no one else notices enough to call out. By the time I finished law school, people assumed I'd follow his path. Same firm. Same practice. Same clients. He didn't say it outright, but it was there, in the way he introduced me. "This is my son. He's getting there. Getting there." I joined a different firm. Mid-sized. Less prestige. More autonomy. He didn't approve, but again, he didn't say it directly. Just little things. Interesting choice. Good place to learn the basics. You'll see how things really work eventually. I let it roll off. Focused on the work. And I was good. Not flashy. Not loud. But consistent. Careful. Detail-oriented. The kind of lawyer clients trust, even if they can't explain why. That's where I met Daniel. He was a few years older, partner track, sharp in a way that didn't need to announce itself. First time we worked together, he handed me a stack of documents and said, "Find me what everyone else missed." No pressure, right? I stayed late. Cross-referenced timelines. Noticed a discrepancy in a contract clause, minor on the surface, but structurally important. Brought it to him the next morning. He read it once. Looked up. "Yeah," he said. "That's gonna matter." That was his way of saying, "You did good." Daniel didn't overpraise. Didn't correct for show. He just trusted you once you proved yourself. It was new. And honestly, it took me a minute to get used to it. The case that put me back in my father's orbit started small. A dispute over intellectual property, two companies arguing over who owned a specific licensing agreement. Our client claimed the contract had been altered after signing. The opposing counsel? My father. Of course. When I saw his name on the file, I just leaned back in my chair and exhaled. Daniel noticed. You know him? He asked. Yeah, I said. A little. He raised an eyebrow. That kind of, a little, usually means something. He's my father. There was a beat. Then Daniel just nodded. Okay. You good to stay on this? I thought about it. All those years of small corrections. Public refinements. Quiet dismissals. Yeah, I said. I'm good. From the start, my father treated the case like it was already decided. In meetings, he spoke over me, not aggressively, just, naturally, like my voice was background noise. In emails, he'd respond to Daniel and skip me entirely, even when I'd authored the question. In one call, I laid out a timeline inconsistency. He paused, then said, I think you're misunderstanding the sequence. Then repeated my point back, slightly reworded. Daniel cut in. That's actually exactly what he said. My father chuckled lightly. Must have missed that. Must have. I muted myself for a second and smiled. Same. Playbook. Different stage. The deeper we got into the case, the more something felt off. Not wrong. Just, too clean. The contract in question had been revised, everyone agreed on that. The dispute was about when. Our client said after signing. Their side said before. The version they presented had metadata supporting their claim. But metadata can be managed. I spent nights going through document histories, version logs, email chains. Looking for something that didn't line up. Patience, right? That's the thing about being underestimated. People stop watching you too closely. It was a Tuesday night when I found it. Buried in an archived email thread, one no one had flagged because it wasn't directly about the contract. A casual exchange between two executives, referencing the updated clause and getting legal to clean it up before anyone notices. The timestamp? 3 days after the contract was supposedly finalized. I stared at the screen for a while. Then I leaned back and let out a slow breath. There it is. I forwarded it to Daniel with a simple note, take a look at the timing. He called me 10 minutes later. Yeah, he said. That's not a small detail. No, I said. It's not. He was quiet for a second. Then, you want to handle this? I thought about my father. About the way he'd stood in that courtroom, already confident. Yeah, I said. I do. Preparation wasn't dramatic. No big speeches. No late-night monologues. Just work. We built the timeline carefully. Cross-referenced the email with internal logs. Verified authenticity. Filed the motion to introduce it as evidence. Their side pushed back, of course. Challenged relevance. Questioned context. My father led that charge. In the hearing before the main trial, he stood there, calm as ever. Your Honor, opposing counsel is attempting to introduce unrelated correspondence to distract from the central issue. I watched him as he spoke. Same posture. Same tone. Like nothing had changed. When it was my turn, I stood up slowly. Your Honor, I said, the correspondence directly references the clause in dispute, and its timing contradicts the timeline presented by opposing counsel. He looked at me then. Really looked. Just for a second. Then back to the judge. Speculation, he said. I let it sit. Didn't push. Didn't argue. Just laid the groundwork. The judge allowed it, for consideration. That was enough. The day of the trial, the courtroom felt smaller than I expected. Or maybe it was just the weight of it. My father was already there when I walked in, reviewing his notes. He glanced up, nodded once. "Morning," he said. "Morning." No tension in the tone. Just distance. Like we were colleagues. Strangers, almost. Daniel leaned in as we took our seats. "You ready?" I nodded. "Yeah." But inside, there was something else. Not nerves. Not exactly. Just anticipation. The early parts of the trial went as expected. Opening statements. Witness testimonies. My father was in control. Confident. Precise. He guided his witnesses cleanly, reinforcing their version of events. When it came time for cross-examination, I kept it tight. Didn't overreach. Didn't reveal too much. Just enough to plant questions. Let the tension build. The turning point came during the examination of their lead executive. He was polished. Prepared. Answered questions smoothly. My father watched from the table, satisfied. When it was my turn, I approached slowly. "Just a few clarifications," I said. We went through the timeline again. Step by step. He stuck to the script. Then I brought up the email. "Do you recognize this correspondence?" He glanced at it. "Yes." "And this refers to the clause in question?" "It appears so." "And the date of this email?" He hesitated. "Just a fraction. 3 days after the contract was finalized." There it was. I let the silence stretch for a second. "Can you explain why the clause is being discussed as updated after finalization?" He shifted slightly. Looked toward my father. "My understanding is that." "Your understanding," I said gently, "or your instruction?" My father stood. Objection. But the judge raised a hand. Let him answer. The executive swallowed. "My instruction," he said quietly. And just like that, the room changed. My father's posture shifted for the first time. Not much. Just enough. He leaned forward, whispering to his co-counsel. I returned to the table, heart steady. Daniel gave me a small nod. "That's it," he murmured. Not yet, I thought. Almost. The final exchange came during closing arguments. My father went first. He tried to reframe it, suggest the email was misinterpreted, taken out of context. But the confidence was thinner now. The edges were showing. When it was my turn, I stood up and walked to the center. Didn't rush. "Your Honor," I said, "this case comes down to trust in the timeline." I laid it out. Clean. Simple. No theatrics. Then I paused. Looked briefly at my father. Throughout these proceedings, there's been an implication that our position relies on dramatics. A faint ripple in the room. I let it pass. But the evidence speaks for itself. And sometimes, the simplest explanation is the correct one. I returned to my seat. No grand finish. Didn't need one. The judge called a brief recess before delivering the ruling. The room buzzed quietly. I sat still, hands folded. My father approached. For a moment, I thought he might say something. He didn't. Just stood there. Looked at me. Then gave a small nod. Not approval. Not quite. But, acknowledgement. He turned and walked back to his table. When the judge returned, the room settled. She adjusted her glasses, glanced over her notes. Then she did something unexpected. She removed her robe. Carefully. Deliberately. Set it aside on the back of her chair. There was a brief murmur, confused, curious. Then she spoke. Before I deliver my ruling, I want to address something. Her voice was steady. Clear. Mr. Carter, she said, looking at my father, you've built a reputation on precision and authority in this courtroom. He straightened slightly. But authority doesn't grant immunity from oversight. She turned her gaze to me. And oversight, when applied carefully, is not dramatics. There was a weight to her words now. A shift. This court recognizes the evidence presented by the plaintiff as credible and decisive. She paused. In favor of the plaintiff. It was done. The aftermath wasn't loud. No celebrations. No raised voices. Just quiet movement. Papers being gathered. Chairs shifting. Daniel clapped me on the shoulder. You handled that well. Thanks. I glanced across the room. My father was packing his briefcase. Slowly. Methodically. He looked up once more. Our eyes met. For a second, I saw something different there. Not dismissal. Not correction. Just recognition. He nodded. I nodded back. Later that evening, I was back in my kitchen. Different from the one I grew up in. Cleaner. Simpler. No burnt edges. Daniel had stopped by earlier, left a bottle on the counter with a note, "You earned this." I poured a glass. Sat down. The room was quiet. And for the first time in a long time, so was everything else. No need to prove anything. No need to adjust. Just stillness. I thought about that word my father used. Fraud. How easily it had come to him. How long it had stayed with me. Then I smiled, just a little. Because in the end, I didn't have to argue it. Didn't have to fight it. I just had to wait. And let the truth do what it does best. Show up. Quietly. Right on time.